So we're going to change the agenda. It's not a mistake, it's just a change. Today we have from United Mine Workers, Phil Smith. He's been all involved with the multi-employer plans. He's done a lot of work. President Reed told me he was his guy, that he's the guy that does all the work in pensions and communications. So we're going to ask him to come up. I want to say to Phil, and working with you and discuss it, we know that you've done a journeyman job, that your organization is doing a wonderful job in trying to deal with a very difficult situation. We certainly like to hear from you. So please step forward. Phil Smith, United Mine Workers.
Thank you, Robert. On behalf of President Roberts, I bring greetings to everybody. We are today in the House of Labor, so I'm going to say good morning, sisters and brothers. Even if you're not in the union or a union, you should be. I don't know if he's working on getting my PowerPoint up at the moment, but today's presentation is called Responses to the Pension Crisis. And I can tell you, as many others of you who have been through this situation, especially with in a multi-employer pension situation, bankruptcy makes a very bad situation even worse. We heard a lot from the previous speakers regarding single employer bankruptcies. Our experience is that that's a piece of cake compared to what you have to deal with in a multi-employer bankruptcy situation, especially when your pension plan is already in pretty bad shape. This happened to us with the UMWA 1974 pension plan beginning in 2008. I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened to the plan. I'm going to talk a little bit about the bankruptcies that exacerbated our troubles. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did with respect to those. What we did is not unique, certainly. It's not something that other unions haven't done successfully in many cases. But I think we put on an effort that brought together a whole lot of different capabilities, different ways of doing things that proved to be successful in the short term. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So in 2008, well, that's the pointer. I'm going to go that way. There we go. 2007, the UMWA 1974 pension plan was 93% funded. And we were on a path actuarially to 100% funding. In 2009, we were 62% funded. Just that period of time, we lost over $2.5 billion in our fund. As this was happening, we were approaching the highest level of beneficiaries in the history of that fund. We were then paying pensions to a little over 100,000 people. We aren't anymore, but we were at that point. The ratio in 2009 of actives to retired workers, we heard a figure here a little bit ago that in the worst plans, it's about 25%. Well, ours, as you can see, was much, much worse than that. It was 12 to 1 at that point. Part of the reason for that is what has already been discussed. We had many employers who had gone out of business, who had failed completely. Our ratio at that time of orphans to actives was about 70% orphans were in our fund. So that means that over the years, all of those companies had gone out of business that previously had been in the coal industry. What exacerbated our trouble, probably more than anything else, was the beginning of a series of bankruptcies in the coal industry. And let me kind of take you back a little bit so you can understand how we got there. In 2007 and 2008, two of the largest contributory companies to our pension plan, Peabody Energy and Arch Coal, created spinoffs into which they transferred all of their legacy liabilities that were under a collective bargaining agreement. These spinoffs were primarily located in West Virginia, Kentucky, Southern Indiana, and Southern Illinois. We left, they left, they put half of their liabilities and their overall liabilities, but all of their contractual liabilities of these spinoffs with just 11% of the assets of these companies. Anybody who understands anything about long-term economics and how companies work understands what was going to happen here without really having to do a whole lot of thinking. At that time, Peabody and Arch declared they were no longer responsible for retiree health care benefits, certainly, but also responsible for contributions to the multi-employer pension plan. The 1974 plan thought differently and filed suit with that, and those, in one case, that litigation is still ongoing. But in another case, eventually, the 74 plan was unsuccessful in getting Peabody to live up to its obligations, primarily because Peabody went bankrupt later on. We'll get to that. In 2010, these two spinoff companies, somebody had the bright idea of merging them into one company. So here were two companies that had very low asset levels, very high liabilities, and decided it would be a good idea to put themselves together and try and operate in a coal market that was iffy at that time to start with. We negotiated a new collective bargaining agreement in 2011 that included no new increases in pension contribution rates and no new increases in pension benefits. We kept that the same, seeing what was coming. And what came in 2012 was a dramatic drop in the price of coal and a dramatic effect on the ability of Patriot Coal, especially, to continue operating in the black. So in June 2012, Patriot Coal went to New York City, where it had just established a subsidiary a month earlier, and filed bankruptcy in the bankruptcy court in New York. Of course, New York isn't anywhere. There's an ounce of coal mined within 200 miles of New York City. But they thought, rightly, that was a good venue for them to go to, because the New York court, those of you who have been through bankruptcy proceedings, the New York court is thought of one that is fairly friendly to companies, and they thought they could get a fairly good result out of there. The other thing that New York has is a whole lot of bankruptcy lawyers. And so they like to work at home, like many of us would like to do. They don't like to have to travel very far. But we decided to see if we could make them travel a little bit. So as a result of that, President Roberts and our executive board decided to implement what we called a multi-pronged strategy, and it consisted of 5 parts. There was a legal strategy, a communication strategy, mobilizing our membership, a collective bargaining strategy, and all running through all of this was and still is a legislative strategy to deal with this issue. So what were our goals in the legal strategy? One was to change the venue from New York City. We knew what the court was like there. We knew what the result was likely to be there. So let's get it out of there. We asked our retirees to write letters to the court, imploring the court to agree with our motion to change the venue. Over 800 of them did. They were in their own words. We didn't write a single guest letter. We didn't write any of those things. They all wrote their own words. At the end of the day, the court did change the venue to St. Louis, which is where Peabody and Patriot and Arch Coal are all located, moving it out of New York City. In the decision, the judge wrote, "I have read the words written by the hands of those who mined the coal." And they are correct that if you're going to take their benefits away from them, they need to be able to look you in the eye while they're doing it, which is we thought a very tremendous decision coming out of a New York bankruptcy judge, but we took it. The other things we wanted to do was to be appointed to the creditors committee. Both the union and the pension plan were appointed to the creditors committee. We found that was a very important step, just within the area of understanding what was going on, understanding what the company was saying, understanding what the lawyers were saying. If you're not on that committee, you'd have a lot of information that you have no access to. So that's a very important step for those who may be facing this in the future. Obviously, we wanted to do our best to challenge Section 1113, which was referred to earlier, which is the section of the code that allows companies to file to terminate collective bargaining agreements. Section 1114 allows courts to terminate retiree benefits, in our case, retiree health care. I don't know that there's ever been a successful challenge to that, but we decided to go ahead and try it anyway. And we were, as everybody else, at the end of the day, unsuccessful. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. And then lastly, we wanted to challenge the system, the bankruptcy system, which allows for executive retention bonuses to the folks, the very folks who put the company into bankruptcy in the first place. In Patriot's case, they applied for $8 million in bonuses, retention bonuses for executives. We challenged that significantly, but again, as is always the case, the bankruptcy court approved these retention bonuses while also approving the 1113 and 1114 motions to eliminate retiree benefits and eliminate the collective bargaining agreement. So we won two and we lost two here, essentially, with respect to our legal strategy. Our communication strategy was much broader. I'm not going to go through everything here, but I think there are a couple of things that we did that really helped us a great deal. Number one was build and strengthen coalitions with allies. That includes a lot of people in this room. That includes a lot of people who work or are affiliated with this building, but it includes more people as well. We reached out to the religious community. We had prayer vigils in St. Louis. We had bishops come and speak to our rallies. We reached out to, there is within the rural areas of the country, many groups of just normal citizens who wanted to help. So we had them on board. We had the Alliance for Retired Americans was there. The Coalition of Black Trade Unions was there. Many of the other unions who operate in St. Louis and around the country were there. Many international presidents came and spoke at our rallies, and one of the things about a UMWA rally is you can't end it without getting arrested, at least some of you. So peacefully, of course, but we had 3 other international union presidents who came and spoke to rallies and were at the end of those rallies in jail. The other thing I think we did that was very effective was what President Roberts called carpet bombing. He was in the infantry in the United States Army in Vietnam. He called me into his office one day and he said, you know, when I was in the infantry and we were getting ready for an assault, we would shoot off mortars and would shoot off the artillery first. He says, I don't want that. He says, I want all the artillery and I want all the airplanes and I want everything else to hit them as hard as we can hit them. So the executive board internet authorized over $2 million of print ads, television ads, radio spots, internet ads, billboards. You couldn't fly or drive into St. Louis without seeing a billboard about these companies that were trying to take away pension and healthcare benefits from their retirees. You couldn't turn on a TV station or watch the news without seeing 1, not 2, not 3, but sometimes 4 ads about what was going on. We did that for the first 2 months of that campaign before any of us set foot in St. Louis. And then, of course, we talked to our membership, kept them completely informed about what was going on, because what we wanted to do was to get them there. I already talked about them writing letters to the New York bankruptcy judge. One of the ways we kept in communication with them was to talk to them every week about what was happening, what the progress was, because at the end of the day, we wanted them on the ground. I have to say, the UMWA is a little bit different than other unions in a couple of respects. We represent about, right now, some 35 to 40,000 active workers, some in the coal industry, some in other industries. We represent and have dues payers of over 70,000 retirees. Our retirees pay dues to our union. They vote in our elections. They are active participants in the structure and the governance of our union. Those are the people, and because our members were working, our active members were working, it was the retirees who came to these rallies. First 500, then 1,500, then 1,800, then 5,000. We had 16 rallies in and around St. Louis over the course of 10 months. We were there every 2 weeks. And at the end of those period, we had 10,000 people who were coming to those rallies, and not just our members, but some of the allies that I spoke about before. We completely encircled Peabody's headquarters downtown St. Louis. And after that, Peabody said, we need to sit down and talk. Also during part of this process, there was a collective bargaining process going along with it. Those of you who have done this before understand what this is. I think the key here was to bring other parties into the solution. Peabody and Arch, as I mentioned before, they said, this isn't us anymore. Patriot Coal was a completely separate company. It was on its own. It had been doing fine until bad things happened in the coal market. We have nothing to do with this. We kept saying, oh, yes, you do. You're the ones who created this company. You're the ones who set it up to fail. So, oh, yes, you do have a responsibility here, and we're going to hold you to that responsibility. And then the fifth part of the strategy was the legislative strategy. We introduced legislations, and actually, I should go back a little bit. Right after the 2008-2009 recession in 2010, we saw what was coming to our pension plan. And legislation was introduced at that time to help preserve the pension plan, and actually received a hearing before the House Committee on Education and Labor, as it was called then. A favorable hearing was reported out favorably and then went nowhere after that, partially due to the inexplicable opposition of the Obama administration. I'm not exactly sure what was going on there, but anyway, they didn't like the way we funded the plan. 2012, we amended that to include retiree health care, 2013. And we built bipartisan support for this legislation. To us, this wasn't a Democratic matter, it wasn't a Republican matter, it was a people issue, it was a people matter, it wasn't a coal issue. There's a lot of people who, for one reason or another, would just as soon not talk about coal, not deal with coal. But the fact of the matter is that these were retired coal miners who had done their best to do the work to power this country for years and years and years. And that was the issue that we were talking about, people, not anything else. So what was the result of all this? In January 2014, as Patriot emerged from bankruptcy, Peabody, Patriot, and Arch agreed to pay $410 million into what amounted to a VEBA for retiree health care moving forward, which gave us time to pass legislation to preserve retirees' health care, which we were successful in doing this past May. We reached a collective bargaining agreement that improved dramatically over what the bankruptcy judge had ordered, but most importantly for this conversation, we kept Patriot into the 1974 pension plan. They did not withdraw. They were not, we were continuing to get those contributions, which was very, very important. They were a large part at that time of our pension base. However, the pension problem, the overall pension problem, remained, because while all of this was going on, we were still seeing a lower contribution level into the pension plan because of the layoffs and closures that were happening in the coal industry generally during this time. That got even worse very quickly. In 2015, the bottom fell out. Primarily as a result of the drop in the metallurgical coal market. Metallurgical coal is used to make steel. When the world economy goes down, the steel market goes down, metallurgical coal market goes down right along with it. So when China stopped building things, when Indonesia stopped building things, when we stopped building things, we saw a dramatic drop in the price of coal. And all of these companies, Walter Energy in Alabama, Alpha Natural Resources, which primarily operated in West Virginia and Kentucky, Patriot Coal again, Peabody Energy, and Arch Coal all filed for bankruptcy that year. In all, from 2012 to today, there have been 53 bankruptcies in the coal industry, which leaves us only about 4 or 5 companies left, major companies, that haven't declared bankruptcy. So you can see that this is the pressure that this puts on a multi-employer fund like ours. Through the bankruptcy process that was gone through in 2015, all of these companies were relieved of their obligations to pay into the pension plan. So we lost all of the contributions. And, by the way, they were relieved of their withdrawal liabilities as well. What was the difference between 2012 and 2015? Why did this happen? Patriot in 2012 wanted to emerge from Chapter 11 still as Patriot Coal. They wanted to continue being a company that was viable as Patriot Coal. So we were able to use those 5 prongs we were talking about to convince them to do that and to convince them to stay in the multi-employer pension plan while they were coming out of bankruptcy. What happened in 2015 is, with the exception of these last 2 companies, Peabody and Arch emerged as Peabody and Arch. And as was pointed out, Peabody has a single employer pension plan that covers our members that work for them out west, and they were fine. These other 3 companies, Walter, Alpha, and Patriot, ceased to exist. It may as well have been a Chapter 7 liquidation and breakup, but they did it through the Chapter 11 process. So what happened was Wall Street investors came in, bought all of the good assets from those companies, the ones that were producing, the ones that had a long-term life to continue to produce, and all of the parts that had the liabilities, including the environmental liabilities, which for coal companies, you might imagine, are fairly significant, and left them in an old company. So there was New Co. and Old Co. New Co. got bought by these Wall Street investment houses, which refused to continue into the pension plan. We felt like we did pretty good just negotiating collective bargaining agreements that kept these workers in the union with some benefit improvements, some wage cuts, but not very many, but we lost their contributions to the pension plan. We were not able to get them back into doing this. So where are we today? UMWA pension plan has assets of about $3.2 billion. We have annual payments of about $600 million. You can do the math and see how long that's going to last, especially when your contributions are now down to about $25 million a year. This isn't going anywhere fast. So we only have 1 major employer still in the plan. And right now, as we sit here today, our ratio of active workers to retirees is 33 to 1. We have liabilities of about $6 billion. And this is a problem. So that's why many of the other remedies that the panel earlier spoke about with respect to MEPRA, with respect to partitioning, with respect to a whole lot of other these things, simply do not work for our retirees. Our average pension per month is $586. The highest level of pensions that our people get are a little over $2,000, and those are only people who retired in the last year or 2. You can't cut your way out of this problem. You can't partition your way out of this problem. The population and the numbers and the money just aren't there. So, one other thing I should point out is, I just said all this stuff, but there are no new workers coming into this plan. This plan is closed. What we've negotiated after that is a 401k plan. So any new miner who's been hired after 2011 does not participate in this plan. So we know how many people are going to get benefits. Pretty much, if the ones who are the youngest work for their 20 years, then they're going to get a benefit. I will say, coal industry these days, that's not a given. So after 2009 recession, I think insolvency was likely for this plan, absent a legislative solution. After the bankruptcy from 2012 to 2015, it is inevitable. We're one of the plans that she was talking about here earlier, that for whom we're not coming out of the red status by ourselves. Legislation really is the only remaining option that will prevent insolvency for this fund and preserve the benefits that weren't promised, but were earned by these retirees. With that, take any questions you may have. Cecile.
Excuse me. They can do this. I mean, I'm like.
Right. Yeah. Cecile's question, it was, have we ever thought about the basic problem with some of this, with the bankruptcy process is that, as many of us have found out, I see President Durkee in the back, he certainly found this out, pensions have come last. Obligations to workers come last in the bankruptcy process. So the secured creditors get paid, the lenders get paid, maybe not everything, but they generally get everything. And oh, by the way, the executives not only get paid, they get bonuses. But the workers who created the wealth of this company don't get their healthcare benefits, they don't get their pension benefits, their contract is thrown out. This is a real problem with bankruptcy law. There are some people on Congress who are promoting legislative solutions to that. I think given the current political atmosphere and up on Capitol Hill, that's fairly unlikely that anything like that's going to happen. But yes, it's extremely unfair. Yes, brother.
You had mentioned that you guys had done over 40 plus additional changes to CBA languages above the judge's decision.
Right.
I don't expect you to go through all 40, but I'm wondering if there's a way that we can communicate and talk about what those are at some point.
Oh, sure.
Because that's very important to the side of the industry that I work in. So
yeah, one of the things that we did, and President Roberts said, was just because the bankruptcy judge says this doesn't mean we have to work under it. And when you communicate that to the company, and if the company wants to not have a collective bargaining issue and a workplace issue, then they're going to sit down and negotiate about that. And we made it very clear to them that what the bankruptcy judge ordered that we take was not something we were prepared to work under. So once you make that statement, then you can start talking to them about what you are prepared to work under. Yes, sir.
Hey, Phil, good seeing you again.
Good seeing you.
Phil, you mentioned legislative solutions. Can you name a couple of proposed solutions that are currently out there that the mine workers are supporting?
Sure. Well, there's legislation that just deals with us called the American Miners Pension Act, which Senators Manchin and Capito and Congressman McKinley are sponsoring, which we are obviously supporting, but it only solves our problem. And I think everyone recognizes who's been working in this space that if Congress is going to do anything, it's going to take a global approach to solving this problem. So there are other proposals out there. Senator Brown and Congressman Neal introduced one a couple of weeks ago, which, if passed as it currently stands, it would solve our problem. UPS, I'm sure most of you who are working in this space are familiar. They've got a proposal out there which would solve our problem. The NCCMP has a proposal out there which would solve our problem. We've been fortunate enough that all of these groups have wanted to have us participate in the solution. So we have. And from our perspective, our goal is to pass something that fixes our problem. What form that takes, how that happens, where we go with it, from our perspective, is somewhat immaterial as long as our problem gets fixed and our members who have these benefits coming get them and get all of them. Well, it's okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And keep going.